we were talking about trade-offs and opportunity costs. And that leaves us with the question, or basically with three questions that must be answered. Three questions. Three questions. No matter what system we have, whether, we're talking about central planning or free markets or mixed markets, three questions that any of those systems, all of them, they have to answer these questions. Okay, so one is what goods will be produced. Now, goods, that's an economic term. We talk about goods and services, so I should probably say goods and services. Goods are anything that we want to buy that is tangible. I mean, it's something, a bottle of soda. Services are things where people do something for you, like do your dry cleaning, clean your house. What goods and services will be produced? That's an R right there. Okay, that's one. Two, how will goods and services be produced? I'm just going to say they. How will they be produced? Will it be with lots of labor? Will it be with robots and capital? Capital being machines and, well, basically anything created by mankind to produce something. How will they be produced? Okay. And three, who will receive those services? I need to write that down because I want to show you, make you see some videos from the former Soviet Union and from current China that will open your eyes. So these are the three questions that have to be answered, and different types of economies answer them differently. So we really could put centrally planned economies on one end, and I don't know if you see this, but I had something come drop down while I was recording it. Centrally planned economies versus free markets. That's supposed to say markets, but I think I've gone off the edge. I'm going to try that again. See if I can get that to go in better. Okay, back to this. And M-A-R. I'm writing with my finger on an iPad. And not a lot of space. I tried using the styluses. I'm trying to tell my phone to shut up. Okay. Okay, I tried using styluses, but they're not any more detailed because they're just about as wide as the tip of my finger anyway, so I might as well just use my finger on the iPad. So we got centrally planned economies on one end, free markets on the other, and we're actually somewhere in between, and that where we are varies really in the United States depending upon who's in charge, of government. because we have one political party that really likes central planning, and the other side that likes free markets. But we're never going to go all the way to free markets, and centrally planned economies historically have never worked. So we're always varying somewhere, depending upon who's in charge. And we call this middle of the road a mixed economy. Okay. Let's talk about, we can go through and we can talk about how we answer these questions. If you remember, the first question was what will be produced? Centrally planned economies, I need to explain to you what that is. Let me change the color here so that we can hopefully not have too much confusion. This is basically communism, socialism, oops, there's a double M, communism, socialism, fascism. A lot of people don't realize that the Nazis were socialists. And it's really weird. They call the Nazis right-wingers, and it's like, well, the socialists are left-wingers. And in fact, look up the party name, what the Nazis' party name was. National Socialists. So look them up. But anyway, all of these, the idea is that the markets aren't free. It's decided by somebody, a committee, and I like to use the term committee, a committee of somebody, what gets done in all cases. And it's a situation where you've got to be perfect. We may get to a point in the future where we have an AI or something that can decide everything that's produced and do it perfectly, but we're not there yet. And historically, every socialist, communist, fascist system, which is what we call a centrally planned economy, they've all failed. But there's always somebody who has hubris. This is a word, just makes you seem smart. What is hubris? I'll just put it in parentheses. Hubris is the belief that you can do what other people have failed to do. It's a form of undeserved belief, unwarranted belief in your intelligence. In other words, I'm smarter than everybody else. But the word hubris means it's not warranted, that you're really not. I mean, if you really were smarter than everybody else, it wouldn't be hubris. But if you are the one that says, I have the vision, everyone has failed. Oh, I'm going to reject with the message. There we go. Okay. Okay. So, by the way, these things here, they're just arrows that got really messy to say, depends upon politics how far mixed the economy goes. But a mixed economy is in the middle. So that's centrally planned, and the main thing you need to know is that economic activity slows down. Okay? Now, free markets, we don't believe in that either, most people, because that implies that everything can be sold. Everything's free. There's no controls. Like, you could sell people, or which we've pretty much rejected that in this era. So all the way over in the free markets, most people don't want to go there. Free markets imply there's no government controls of any sort or no government involvement. But what about consumer protections? Things that tell people they have to tell you what's in that sausage they're selling. I kind of like knowing what kind of chemicals are in my sausages. And most of us do. most of us like the fact that there's laws that say you can't tell people there's all beef pepperoni and actually it's chicken and pork or rat. I mean, there protections for the weak and the innocent so that they're not taken advantage of in the market system. They don't bother me to have that type of government involvement. The question is, how far do you go between these areas? The more free the market is, the more heat there is in the market. There's a lot of stuff going. It's hopping. So I'm just going to use fast as the opposite of slow. So centrally planned economies slow way down, and there's not a lot of transactions. There's just not much going on. To give you an example, the last presidential administration never had the growth of GDP exceed 3%. And I'm not sure that since we've been, from what I've studied a lot, but since we've been counting these things in the early 1900s, early to mid 1900s, we started calculating these things. I don't believe there's been a president who's had that slow a growth in the economy. But the previous administration was very interested in expanding central planning. So I'm speaking as a scientist. Whether you like it or not, things were slow. GDP growth didn't exceed 3%, and it had always exceeded 3%. We might have a slight downturn, but bam, it went right back up. And it never did in 8 years. And free markets, if they're truly free, there's lots of growth. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of activity. Boom, 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 boom. Things happen. But we don't want to go too far free market because of these questions of how we need some regulation, right? I mean, you don't want people owning and selling slaves, and we don't want consumers to be told that there's a pound of oats in their oatmeal box and they open it up and there's an ounce instead of a pound, because there was no laws about what they could tell them, and everything else was just packaging, lots of sawdust in there, So how far do we go? Now that's how far you go towards a free market or towards a centrally planned economy. That's for voters. That's not for me as your professor to tell you. I'm just telling you that things slow down and not a lot of things get produced and not a lot of stuff gets done the more regulations you have. Regulations stemming, centrally planned, right? Centrally planned. When you start having rules for everything and everybody has to fill out a form, it slows things down, especially when it forbids many, many, many things. Things just don't get done. Free markets, things happen, but there's things we want to stop. Maybe me as a voter, I might vote to be at a different point on this curve than you. So we're all going to want to be in different places, and then the democratic system settles it. Or not the democratic, the voting, our constitutional method of voting and choosing government. That decides where we are. As your professor, I can tell you these things are true about this end, and I can tell you, okay, something happened and we stopped recording, and I can tell you this stuff is true, and I can tell you this is where we are, but where exactly we are on that line between them, that changes from election to election. Okay. Now, Let's talk about what goods and services will be produced. Who chooses? So if we have central planning and we have free markets, okay, I'm just going to go with the extremes, okay? Who chooses is the question, I would say. And that will tell you a lot. Who chooses? In central planning, that's what CP stands for, a committee chooses, and they'll choose what's good for you or what they think is good for you. I remember I was an adult when the USSR was still in operation, and I grew up with the USSR. And the USSR had the best operas and the best ballets, and the best. I mean, they had really good athletes in the Olympics, and they had really good ice skaters. And what I didn't know at the time was that that was pretty much what entertainment was allowed. Opera, they had opera, and they had ballets, and they had symphonies, and at the same time, over in the United States, we had what? Football stadiums and movie theaters and baseball and yeah, there were operas and there were symphonies and there were ballets, but it wasn't chosen for. Now I sound like I'm being biased, but I will admit I kind of like being the one who chooses what I do for entertainment. So, who chooses in central planning? Committee. Somebody. Government people, I'm just going to call it a committee. Somebody makes the decision what goods and services are produced. Is it going to be an opera house or a baseball stadium? Is it going to be a ballet or a basketball stadium? Or who chooses over here with the free market? That's what the FM stands for. Consumers. If it's something, no, boy, this is getting all crunched up together. Consumers and committee, and this is FM for free market. Okay, I'm trying to keep this. Okay, now, I've taken a lot of classes outside of the economics department, and I've sat in on classes, and I was at another university, and I sat in on a class on social choice and things like that, and I've sat in on classes on comparative economic theory written by non-economists. I mean, taught by non-economists. So there was a sociologist teaching a class, and I sat in on it, and he was saying that this is a flaw of capitalism, that we spend a lot of money on things like advertising, which I understand that argument. I also understand why it fails. But he also said, and look at all the people, playing computer games and, going to movies and watching television. This is bad. These are bad things of capitalism. And I thought, well, if you're looking at it from the point of view of someone who believes that they should make decisions for other people, but I wouldn't want someone telling me I can't be a gamer. I mean, and I ride motorcycles. I do all kinds of things that may not be healthy, and I love it. But see, that's me. So you yourself can choose which way you want, and I am biased. I like that the consumers choose what we are going to have. But a committee will choose what's produced. Are they going to, produce, use the wealth of the nation to build naval ships, or are they going to use the wealth of the nation to build roads? That will all be decided by committee. Now, some things are decided even under free markets. Whenever you have a government will take taxes and they will build things. But when you have central planning, everything is planned, including your free time. Okay, now let's try something else. How will things be produced? I'm just going to shorten this and say how produced, okay? Just because I don't have a lot of space. How produced. So we've got central planning, and on the other side we have free markets, and of course somewhere in the middle is mixed markets, right? Okay, and the question is how produced. Now, I will tell you, central planning stems from Marxism, and one of the components of all of Karl Marx's writings is that capitalism is evil and capital is evil. The original idea and the way they would get workers to join the Communist Party was to go to where the workers were meeting, go to a pub, go to a bar, and say, now wait a minute, the person who owns the equipment at the factory owner is using something that was built with labor, and now they've appropriated the labor and they're using it against the workers. And so the capital itself was perceived as evil. Think about that. So how produced? Are we going to do it with labor or capital? Capital being machinery and buildings and things that we produce to produce something else. But a lot of it is capital equipment. Okay? It's interesting. They went with big capital for building things in shipyards and things, massive cranes and massive things like that. But central planning still relied on the dogma or the saying, capital is evil. So if you're going to make shoes or anything like that doesn't require a massive crane. I mean, it was amazing. I didn't go to the USSR when it was going on, but I had professors that went, and they said it was kind of weird. They had this dogma, they had this idea that capital was evil. So if you're making shoes or making a table or something, a lot of it was done with hands and hand tools and small things. But if you were building a ship for the Navy or something, they'd use capital. They'd have big cranes and big equipment. But for anything for the consumers, they would go, no, capital is evil. So it wasn't really done for efficiency. Now, in a free market, people are using their rational self-interest. So what are they going to do? Well, in a free market, you're going to do whatever's cheapest in terms of resources, and that will result in higher profits. So the choice is based upon efficiency, right? I didn't have room to write that out neatly, but I meant, if it's efficient to use lots of workers, you will, and if it's efficient to use computers, you will do that. I started out as a illustrator for Boeing. It was really bizarre. As a young person in high school, I was at one of those big city high schools out there in the Seattle area, and so they had this thing that if you wanted to learn a trade, you could graduate early, and you wouldn't have to worry about studying to go to college. It's funny, I ended up going to college for 13 years in the end. But at the time, I thought, I'm going to beat the system. I'm going to be out of here. And I was. I was working at Boeing months and months before my fellows. I learned how to do technical art and commercial art, and before my fellow fellows in my class graduated from high school, I had been working for like 6 months at Boeing, and I remember that I was one of the first people who ever drew the 757, which had not been built yet. No one had seen one, and they gave me the huge blueprints. They gave me these blueprints that I spread out on my desk, and they said, that's what it looks like from all the different angles, you know, top, side, etc., cross sections. And they said, now, draw us what it would look like in real life. So I took the blueprints and I drew a picture of the Boeing 757, and it's kind of interesting, you know. I later saw the picture in the papers and in magazines, an artist's conception of what the 757 will look like. Well, now it's all done by computers. It took me 90 hours to get just ink in the outline and the basic, you know, the windows would angle like this, and this is what will, you know. And 90 hours, that's 2 weeks plus working into Tuesday of the third week is how long it took me to draw a sketch of you know, on a two-dimensional surface of what it would look like if it was flying. Well, computers came along, and guess what happened to my job? Yeah, out you go. And so I was out, and I had to go back to school, and I studied for 13 years and got my doctorate, and here I am now. But still, the point I'm making is that when the capital equipment and the technology came along, that it became cheaper and quicker and just basically more efficient to have a computer image an airplane than to have an artist take 90 hours to decipher the blueprints and plug all that in. They make the change, and they go with the one that doesn't waste resources as much. And we're going to find out that that's important. And from the point of view of green Earth, not wasting resources is important, because we get more and more people and more, you know, more and more mouths to feed, and more people who need things to be produced for them, and the more efficient we get at that, the more stuff we can have without wasting Earth's resources. So free markets tend to go with what's most efficient, because people will make more profits, and therefore they don't want to waste things. So that's how it's decided. Basically, the rational self-interest thing that Adam Smith talked about. Who will receive? Who will receive the goods and services? That's the third question, right? Who will receive? Well, I'm going to be having you look at some other videos. But what we're going to find is that discrimination, let's try this one. Discrimination occurs more in non-market situations. I mean, we can talk about the fascists if you want. Central planning more often. Surprise! When we start planning, what happens is you end up with more shortages with central planning for a variety of reasons, and I will talk about those later. But you end up with more shortages, and so somebody has to decide how to handle the shortages. So be aware of that. Even in China and in the Soviet Union, they ended up doing the same thing. Members of the Communist Party which was an elite group. You get you don't get to be in it unless you're invited. And I actually have a friend whose father was asked to be in the Communist Party, and her dad hated the Communist Party. I met her when I was in China, and we've become lifetime friends. Then that's a long story. But anyway, her dad hated the Communist Party, but he didn't turn it down because they could get food and better clothes and stuff because they were allowed to shop at stores that the regular citizens couldn't shop at. Isn't that kind of amazing? The goal of communism is that everybody be equal, and you end up with one group of ruling class that gets to shop in the good stores, and then everybody else. And that happened in the Soviet Union. It happens everywhere. But anyway, I'm going to have you look at some videos. They're amazing. Discrimination. I had somebody in one of my classes make the comment when we were talking about this in class that green is only one color. Money is green, and anybody that has it. So, in a free market system, if you want to, if you've got millions of dollars, and it really doesn't matter, who you are, you can get what you need in a free market system because the rational self-interest says, yeah, I'll sell you that. Just give me the $100,000 or whatever I need. But I'm not saying we don't have discrimination in our system. We do. I'm not saying we don't. But I'm saying that some of the truly amazing amounts of discrimination have happened in central planning. So, if there are more shortages, right, in central planning, so how do you solve shortages? Well, you can blame somebody and say, everybody except those purple people can have stuff, so you can blame people and discriminate, or you can, so that is something people do. I'm not saying we should, but it is something that happens. I'm trying to write with my finger and I've skipped discriminate. There. Or how about ration? Problem is, somebody has to choose what's fair. I mean, let's just say, let's say we had to ration gasoline, okay? For some reason we had a shortage, and instead of solving it with free markets, we said, hey, we will just say that the committee will choose who gets more coupons for gasoline than others. So let's just say that we were just going to ration for people that come here on campus and go to school, okay? For some reason. We're just going to ration gasoline. So the committee, who's going to be on the committee, even if it was a government agency, at the state level or the federal level, who do they put on those committees? I bet it's people with lots of education. So they're going to decide how to ration in Martin. Who's going to get the more ration books? Now, that's probably not going to be the students who have to travel farther to come in here. It's probably going to be the faculty members with the high education that are going to get the coupons, right? Because somebody decided, and who decided? In other words, there will be biases on the committee, and I'm just making the comment that it's probably going to be people with education, so they're probably going to give people with education more coupons, not the poor students who are traveling 45 miles to get here for classes. No, it's going to be the faculty that live within a mile who get the extra. I mean, that's just an example, but I'm pointing out rationing is done by people with their own biases. How about getting in lines? Or as they say in Britain, queuing up. Get in the queue. Isn't that how we ration emergency room care? Because we've said that there is no market price, that people can go to the emergency room and get free care if they can't afford it, right? So there's not a dollar price on that emergency room care. So free clinics, emergency rooms, you go and you sit in line, and those that are desperate stay longer, and those that aren't desperate get tired and leave, or they don't go because, you see what I'm saying? So that's one way we ration it, isn't it? That it's like, okay, I'm not hurt bad enough to have to go sit for 12 hours to get emergency room care. Forget it. So getting in lines. So there's other ways, but what we find out with the free markets is markets clear. Markets clear, and we don't have the shortages. So we have an equilibrium price, we have an equilibrium quantity, which we'll be talking about, and at that equilibrium there is no shortage and there is no surplus. And so basically, if you can afford the price, you can have it. Now that doesn't, I have never said that the equilibrium price was ethical or fair. Those are words that don't enter my science. But voters at least don't have a shortage to deal with. They then have to deal with questions of how do we provide this service for people who can't afford it if we want to. And so that's for voters. The problem is when we start having to deal with the fact that some people can't afford the price, there's just not a lot of efficient ways to do that. So other than trying to find ways to get the price lower by offering incentives of sorts so that the market actually changes its price. So anyway, these are some questions that have to be answered by centrally planned economies, mixed markets, free markets, and I think that's a good place to stop this video. Okay? I'll see you in class.